number of key people in a parliament. Most people, if asked who is the most important person in a parliament, would probably say the Premier. But the Premier, while important, is not the most important. He or she is the head of government, not the head of a parliament. That position lies with the President of the Upper House, the Legislative Council, and the Speaker of the Lower House, the Legislative Assembly. Together, they are the presiding officers of the Parliament. In other words, they are joint number one. The Honourable Kate Doust is the first woman to be President of the Legislative Council in Western Australia. She has been a Member of Parliament since 2001, but she doesn't need to wear the wig.
I think I said on my first day I'm very interested in seeing how we can harness new technologies to further improve our work here, how we can use that to better engage with community. So I think that's an interesting discussion. I'm very keen on looking at how we can, as I said earlier, make this a more family-friendly environment for people, whether that's looking at how we manage our standing orders with our sitting times, or whether we look at the types of facilities and arrangements we have to assist families when they need it here. Very keen at looking at how we look at the long-term future of this building and the needs of the Parliament. We are currently spread out over quite a large area, and so I would hope that we can have an appropriate discussion about how we rehouse or rethink those arrangements. This is our key place of democracy in our state, and I think it should be fully accessible by people in our community. Look at how we fit with those changes.
But who are some other key people? The term clerk may seem to describe someone with possibly a humble job. However, in a parliament, the clerk holds a very powerful position.
I sometimes have people phone me up and I tell them I'm the clerk, and they say, well, put me through to someone who's in charge. And I say, well, I am. And that's the real, I suppose, the misconception and the irony about the title of clerk. One of the roles of a clerk is to ensure that the legislation or the bills that are passed through the houses do so in a proper and constitutionally valid way. So I'm the clerk of the Legislative Council, but I have another role as the clerk of the Parliaments. That role is to ensure that the bills that pass both of these houses do so in a constitutionally valid way, and also that the bills that go to Her Excellency for the Royal Assent have been passed, are in the same form as passed by both houses. So for a bill to become a law and be available for the Royal Assent, they have to be in identical form. So we can't have the Legislative Assembly pass one type of proposed law and the Council pass another one and present something to the Governor for the Royal Assent, because they're not in identical form. So there is a checking process that occurs, a very thorough one, that involves not only staff of my department, but also Parliamentary Counsel's office.
One of the most important things is to keep proceedings going and to make sure that they're happening in the correct manner, in the correct form, and in the correct order as well. So keeping a track of that. But then also providing advice to all the members, potentially all 59 members. Not that we get asked by all of them at the same time, but whenever proceedings are on foot, we'll get asked to perhaps draft amendments, or a member might want to get some procedural advice about what to do next. The Speaker might need advice from the Chair. So I need to be able to provide sort of quick and timely advice to the members. Sometimes it might even be a member of the same side asking for advice. And we have to provide that advice confidentially, so I can't let anyone know that someone else has approached me. So I might be giving the same advice to that person. I might be giving advice on the same subject matter, but to the other side.
Parliament House in Perth was opened in 1904. It is an old building and takes a lot of maintenance to keep it looking at its best. It is a huge and expensive task. Who is in control of that? Rob Hunter is Executive Manager of Parliamentary Services, and he will explain some of the things his department is required to undertake to keep the building going.
Parliament as an organisation is 3 departments, and Parliamentary Services is actually the largest of those 3 departments, but not necessarily more important, but does provide all the support services now. It is actually a fairly complicated department because we look at a whole lot of things, including the building, making sure that the grounds and the building's kept to a standard that people can be proud of and also is very welcoming. And also looks at things like IT infrastructure, the library, education office, finance, HR, Hansard, which is a very important aspect of our area. So keeping it all together takes a fair bit of coordination, but we stay in the background just so that we can support the Members of Parliament and the 2 chamber departments. So we're pretty proud of what we do, but it's a lot of coordination, a lot of time and a lot of planning.
But a parliament would not be parliament without politicians. So, how do you keep 95 members of parliament under control? They need to be whipped into line, and that is the job of the whip. The government whip sits here. It comes from the fox hunting term, the whipper-in, who kept the hunt going in the right direction. They must keep the pack together and prevent the hounds from straying or rioting. Not an easy task. David Templeman and Tony Kristicevic have performed the job of whip for their respective party.
The bells were ringing and I very quickly realised that the government numbers were not flowing into the chamber as they were expected, and the resulting outcome was that when the doors were locked, we had one more than the government, which was the first time in the millennium, and I of course highlighted it was the first time this century that we had seen the opposition win a vote on the floor of the House. Very embarrassing for the government and certainly controversial for them. Apparently, a number of the ministers claimed that they had not heard the bells, which I found a little interesting. But the result was an embarrassing moment for the government, and I highlighted very clearly that the maintaining of the numbers is essential for the whip.
Basically, as the whip, you need to know what's going to happen before the opposition even knows what's going to happen and what they're thinking. It's quite interesting. I know and there's no manual that tells you how to do the job. There's no handover. Pretty much you're given the mantle from day one and you're off and running. And I remember on the very first day, the Premier came up to me and he asked me a question and I had no idea what the answer was. And my response to the Premier at the time was, the opposition's getting back to me, and I'll get back to you as soon as I find out. And then I ran off and found out what he wanted to know. I didn't tell him I had no idea. That was not going to be my upfront response, but I worked out pretty much straight away there and then that I needed to know everything that was going on about everything in Parliament as well as possible, because people would come up to you and say, how many speakers do the opposition have? Are we going into consideration in detail? Is there going to be a vote? Are they going to be moving any amendments? All sorts of questions would be asked of you. What time are we going home? And of course, as I would tell people frequently, I said, as at this point in time, this is what my answer is. But as soon as I walk away from this conversation, it could be something completely different. Because Parliament is very dynamic. Nothing sits still and it changes from minute to minute. And so sometimes people get frustrated and they say, well, you told me this was going to happen. And you're trying to explain to them, because they don't understand the finer details. You're trying to explain that things actually change. As soon as I walk away from this conversation, the next conversation could change the dynamic completely.
Control and discipline are requirements of any parliament. The Usher of the Black Rod and the Sergeant-at-Arms are the constables of the Parliament. And this is where the Sergeant-at-Arms sits.
The role of the sergeant as the enforcer does come up from time to time in the House. So, for example, if we have demonstrations in the gallery, the Speaker will usually address those who are demonstrating directly and will say, you're most welcome to witness the proceedings of the House, but you must not interrupt or interpose yourself in those proceedings. But if those who are demonstrating continue, despite repeated warnings from the Speaker, then the Speaker will then direct the Sergeant to go up and remove those members from the gallery. So that has happened. It's happened to me a few times since I've been in the role, most markedly when we had actually, I would say probably about 40 demonstrators who basically rose en masse in the public gallery, and it was actually quite intimidating to everybody when they did that. And the Speaker basically directed me to go up and clear the gallery. The Speaker rose and left the chamber, so I took the mace and led the Speaker out of the House, immediately handed the mace over and ran upstairs to the gallery. But very fortunately on that occasion, those protesters had decided that enough was enough, that given the Speaker had left the chamber, in a sense, oxygen had gone out of the situation. With the exception of the immediate precincts of this chamber, we have a full security department, whereas in London the Sergeant-at-Arms is heavily involved in that security. My principal role actually is the Principal Research Officer for the Procedure and Privileges Committee.
It takes enormous discipline and skill to record the discussion and debate in both the Houses of Parliament, and this is the job of a Hansard reporter. There are over 20 Hansard reporters in the Western Australian Parliament. What do they do, and how do they do it?
We operate in the chamber on 10-minute, what we call turns. So we're basically in here for 10 minutes of debate, and in my case, I'm listening out for changes of speaker or interjections, so that, because I'm a voice recognition reporter, so I then, at the end of my turn, go back to the office and access the recording of the 10 minutes of debate, and then transcribe it, or editing as I go, using voice recognition technology.
So we work like a relay team, basically taking each other off. And I use a stenography machine, so I come in and basically take down the names of who's talking at the time, and I also listen and maybe do some editing when I take down. So I'm really, the voice, rather than being a language where you listen and speak, I'm sort of feeding that information through to my hands and editing as I go along. So perhaps something's said that's not quite grammatically correct and my brain automatically changes it to be readable or make sense. That's part of the skill as well, with just making that an automatic process when you're a stenographer.
If an army marches on its stomach, as Napoleon is reputed to have said, then so does a parliament. On a sitting day, members and their staff might arrive at the Parliament at around 9 a.m. and might still be there at midnight. Approximately 300 people work in the Parliament on a sitting day, and feeding them is an enormous challenge. Head chef Brett Barrett tells us how it is done.
Busiest days are the sitting days, the lunches and the dinners. There's sort of 400 in the building then, plus members, so we're looking at around 500. On top of that, there's all the meeting rooms, there's all the additional catering, cafeteria here. The food demand, the bulk volume is quite high. Most chefs are in at 7, and it's 4 or 5 hours of solid prep to get cafeteria food, restaurant food, function, catering, all those foods prepped. Lunch service down here from 11 o'clock, in the restaurant from 12. 2 hours of lunch service, it's packed down, orders, logistics, any maintenance, faults, OSH issues to deal with, answer some emails, and then do it again tomorrow. On a sitting day, we have the dinner service, an extra 120 covers upstairs, and on a table d'hote menu, and then probably another 100 plus down here on top of our normal numbers. So then that prep day becomes a lot longer. We come down from lunch and we get back into evening prep service, and we set up and go again.
And finally, the first person you come into contact with when you visit the Parliament is the person you meet at reception when you arrive. Thousands of people come through reception each year.
We welcome them to the building, and then when they come, we issue them with an ID badge or a pass, and then we welcome them into the Forest Foyer. We man a switchboard, all the incoming queries, any questions about Parliament or members. We deal with them face-to-face on the phone. We also support members administratively, so with paging, or if they need, with mail, we all do that sort of thing at reception services. On a sitting day, when it's super busy, we have nearly 100 calls in the day. Some people don't realise that the members aren't here except on those sitting days, and so we can tell them the electorate numbers, we can give them ministerial numbers, and just sort of point them in the right direction.
Many people work in the Parliament. Some are known to the general population, but many are not, and that is just how some of them like it. However, all are key people in the Parliament.